Cockroach sex took a strange turn. Now more mutations have emerged. Evolution has saved roach reproduction from an earlier mutation that interfered with how males court females. Cockroaches are changing up their sex lives, and it's all our fault. Faced with sweet poisoned bait, roaches first ended up with a mutation that made them hate sweets, hindering their mating strategies. Now, more roach mutations are emerging, showing you can't keep a good pest down. Like many animals, cockroaches have a sweet tooth, and that preference for sugar plays a central role in their reproductive activities. When a male roach targets a female roach, he will back up to her, secreting a solution called a nuptial gift from the tergal gland under his wings. The solution is full of proteins, fats and sugars, what some researchers call the chocolate of roach food. The female cockroach will crawl up on his back to take a sample, and while she is occupied, the male will whip out a hooked penis to latch onto her reproductive tract. They will then turn back to back and do the deed for about 90 minutes. Humans have aimed to exploit this love of sweet stuff to push cockroaches, particularly the German cockroaches that turn up in American homes, out of our spaces. For decades, people used poisoned roach baits baited with solutions containing glucose. Cockroaches took the bait, but sometime in the late 20th century, a new mutation arose, glucose aversion. No one knows how many roaches now hate the sweet stuff, but Kobe Schell, an evolutionary biologist at North Carolina State University, suspects the mutation is very common. There are more and more papers being published on the fact that a whole suite of baits don't work so well, he said. This lack of a sweet tooth saved cockroaches from death, but it hurt their sex lives. The gift that normal males secrete contains maltose, a sugar that cockroach saliva transforms into glucose. But if females had the glucose-averse mutation, they did not find the male secretions sexy and turned away before the male could hook on. But Dr. Schell and his colleagues could not help but notice that males with glucose aversion were still getting lucky with glucose-averse females. They took a close look, comparing mating between sweets-loving roaches and the sugar-free variety. In a study published on Wednesday in Proceedings of the Royal Society B, the scientists showed that the glucose-averse males had accumulated additional mutations. Instead of producing nuptial gifts containing more maltose, they produced ones that contained a more complex sugar, maltodextrin. That substance takes longer to break down into glucose in a female roach's saliva, Dr. Schell said, and it's actually preferred by females. But even with a sweeter gift, the glucose-averse roaches were taking no chances. Sugar-loving males took a lengthy 3.3 seconds to begin mating with a female while she dined, Dr. Schell said, which meant they only succeeded about half the time. Sugar-free males leapt into action in 2.1 seconds, succeeding 60% of the time. Marlene Zuck, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities who was not involved in the study, praised it, saying it was interesting to people who don't care about cockroaches and that it revealed facets of how mating behaviors evolve. It illustrates really well that there's this constant balance between the pressures of survival and the pressure to mate as much as possible, she said. But the latest mutations emerged among lab-reared roaches, noted Richard French Constant, who studies the molecular biology of insects at the University of Exeter in England. Whether these are the traits that are really going to emerge in nature, I think is open to discussion, said Dr. French Constant, who was not involved in the study. Dr. Zuck added that these mutations did not emerge purposefully. Glucose aversion solved one problem and created another, but male roaches were not going around trying to make sweeter nuptial gifts. For every mutation that helps a roach get lucky, another might achieve the opposite. Stuff just happens, she said. There's no guarantee that says you are going to make it somehow, but this time, roach romance has come out on top. Cockroach reproduction has taken a strange turn. In response to pesticides, many cockroach females have lost their taste for sweet stuff, which changes how they make the next generation of insects. When a male cockroach wants to mate with a female cockroach very much, he will scoot his butt toward her, open his wings and offer her a homemade meal, sugars and fats squished out of his tergal gland. As the lovely lady nibbles, the male locks onto her with one penis while another penis delivers a sperm package. If everything goes smoothly, a roach's romp can last around 90 minutes, but increasingly, cockroach coitus is going really, weirdly wrong, and is contributing to roach populations in some places that are more difficult to vanquish with conventional pesticides. Back in 1993, scientists working at North Carolina State University discovered a trait in the German cockroach, a species that inhabits every continent except Antarctica. Specifically, these new cockroaches seem to have no affection for a form of sugar called glucose, which was strange because, as anyone who has ever battled against a cockroach infestation knows, cockroaches normally cannot get enough of the sweet stuff. So, where did these new, health-conscious cockroaches come from? It seems we created them by accident after decades of trying to kill their ancestors with sweet powders and liquids laced with poison. The cockroaches that craved sweets ate the poison and died, while cockroaches less keen on glucose avoided the death traps and survived long enough to breed, thus passing that trait down to the next cockroach generation. When we think of evolution, we usually imagine wild animals, but actually, it's also happening with small animals living in our kitchens, said Ayako Watakatsumata, an entomologist at North Carolina State University. Dr. Watakatsumata and her colleagues have just introduced yet another wrinkle to the cockroach's story. According to a study published this month in the journal Communications Biology, the same trait that might help a female cockroach avoid sweet-tasting poison baits also makes her less likely to stick around and mate with normal cockroach males. This is because cockroach saliva is capable of rapidly breaking down complex sugars, like those found in the male's courtship offering, and turning them into simple sugars, such as glucose. So when one of these glucose-averse females takes a bite of the male's nuptial gift, it literally turns bitter in her mouth and she bolts before he can complete the double barrel lock and pop maneuver. Great, you may be thinking. The fewer cockroach hookups, the fewer infestations we'll have. Not so fast, said the researchers. As to how this will affect the population, it's really complicated, said Dr. Watakatsumata. That's because, despite the hang-ups, glucose-averse cockroaches still find ways to do the deed. In lab experiments, Dr. Watakatsumata and her colleagues showed that glucose-averse females are more skittish of males than wild-type cockroaches, which is what the researchers call the roaches without glucose aversion. However, they also found that glucose-averse males seem to compensate for this by more rapidly transitioning into sex after offering their gift. The glucose-averse females might spend, say, 3 seconds feeding on the male's secretion, said Kobe Shull, distinguished professor of entomology at North Carolina State and an author of the study. The wild-type male does not respond in 3 seconds. The glucose-averse male does. The researchers even have evidence that suggests that all of these new pressures are causing changes in the chemistry of the glucose-averse male's nuptial gift, potentially so he can continue attracting females. From a scientific perspective, the German cockroach's sugar saga shows how humans can drive both natural selection, the cockroaches that survive our poison traps, as well as sexual selection, the glucose-averse cockroaches who no longer want to mate with cockroaches that still offer sweet snacks. Continue reading the main story. I think that's what makes this so compelling, Dr. Shull said. The idea that humans impose very strong selection on animals around us, especially inside our home, and that the animals respond not only with physiological changes but also with behavioral changes. The good news for consumers is that pesticide manufacturers share Dr. Watakatsumata and Dr. Scholl's enthusiasm for understanding cockroach evolution, and they are actively changing their cockroach killing formulations to move away from glucose. But given how new this research is, it will take some time for those changes to make their way to the products on our shelves. The worst thing that you can have as a product is a bait that is not eaten by cockroaches, said Dr. Scholl. Gaga. Adaptive traits are shaped by environmental pressures that select on natural genetic variation. Generally, traits evolve slowly over a long time, succeeding 60% of the time. Marlene Zuck, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities who was not involved in the study, praised it, saying it was interesting to people who don't care about cockroaches and that it revealed facets of how mating behaviors evolve. It illustrates really well that there's this constant balance between the pressures of survival and the pressure to mate as much as possible, she said. But the latest mutations emerged among lab-reared roaches, noted Richard French Constant, who studies the molecular biology of insects at the University